Back here on Wake Up Wyoming, it is 7:25. Vic Wright being joined in the studio with Representative Scott Clem. He is from House District 31 with the Wyoming House of Representatives. Also joining me in the studio is Rod Geil. Rod Geil in the studio as well. Good morning, gentlemen. How's it going this morning?
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing grand. All right, hold on one second, Rod. Let's get this microphone a little bit that way for you. Say hi to everybody again.
Hello, hello.
Perfect. All right, there we go. Okay, so, Scott, why don't you introduce Rod for us and tell us who Rod is? I'll let Rod explain who he is as well, but I'll let you get the conversation started here.
Good morning. Yeah, I'm joining here with Rod Geil. Rod is the director of the Conventions of States project here in Wyoming. So he's the state director, and he's really spearheading the effort in Wyoming to pass an application to have a convention of states limited to 3 subjects. And I'll let him talk a little more about that. But I've known Rod now for about a year now, I think is what it's been. And so with that, Rod,
how's it going?
It's going good.
First off, what is the Convention of States project?
Convention of States is part of Article 5 in the Constitution. Congress can make proposed amendments, and so can the states. They just get together and talk about them and debate them.
Okay. Now, why is Article 5 such an important tool for citizens to use in fighting an overreaching federal government?
Well, the states always, individual states can have initiatives from the people. National does not have a referendum. This is the closest thing to it.
Okay. Can you get a little more detail on that for us?
The legislators pass an application to meet to propose amendments to the Constitution. That is then sent to Congress. Congress sends it to the states for ratification.
All right. Very good.
Well, and if I can just jump in there and just say this is part of the original Constitutional Convention, in which our founders in their wisdom really spoke up and said, you know what, if you give a federal government all of the power, they are not going to give power back to the people and reverse themselves. And so they gave 2 ways to put together constitutional amendments or to add amendments to the Constitution. One is through Congress, through 2/3 of votes of both chambers of Congress. So the House and the Senate, by 2/3 vote majority, can then create an amendment, and then that amendment has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, or 38 states. It only takes 13 states to defeat an amendment. And then the other process is for states to circumvent Congress altogether, which is why this is so palatable. This is the states, this is the people, the grassroots, fighting back against a tyrannical and runaway government. We have a runaway Congress, a runaway judiciary, and a runaway executive branch. We have a runaway federal government. And so what this does is it says, listen, when 2/3 of the states put together a similar application, and that's basically a resolution that's passed in the legislatures of 2/3 of the states. So they pass this resolution. It's an application. You have to have similar language. There's been 400 or 500 applications throughout the history of our nation. Why haven't we had a convention of states? Well, it's because you have to have similar language. For instance, this last year, the Wyoming legislature passed a balanced budget amendment. And then basically what that was, it was a resolution to have a convention of states to discuss only a balanced budget amendment. So that's the idea of the Convention of States, is that when 2/3 of the states put together an application, then, according to the Constitution, Congress can choose then the time and the place where the convention meets. But Congress has no say in the matter. Then the states meet together. They send delegates. It's one vote for one state. Once any amendments are debated, a vote is taken. If a vote passes by a simple majority, then Congress gets to choose the method of ratification according to the Constitution, and then 3/4 of the states, or 38 states, have to then vote in favor of that particular amendment in order for it to become part of the Constitution.
All right, so let's look at the balanced budget amendment for an example here. What other states, if any, have had similar wording that in this one instance you're talking about, Scott?
This is the closest one to actually having a convention of the states. and I think we're at 31 states. I think we're getting there, and we need, I believe it's 34 states. So 2/3 of the states are 34 states in order to call a balanced budget amendment or to have a balanced budget amendment. And again, some people get a little bit scared. Some people really like the idea, and then some people get scared. They say, well, we're going to have a runaway convention. Well, again, I don't believe that's possible. There's our framers in their brilliance put together so many different checks and balances to prohibit a runaway convention. For instance, even if an amendment came out of a proposed convention, if we have a balanced budget amendment, and let's say something crazy happens, this is the one that always comes up. Well, they're going to go ahead and get rid of the Second Amendment. Well, let's say that it actually passed a convention of states. By the way, if something were to happen like that in the convention, a simple point of order would stop the whole thing completely. But let's say something crazy happens and there's a runaway convention. It's Congress that gets to choose the method of ratification. If they say, hey, listen, Convention of States, you guys went outside of your purview here. You didn't. Your amendment that you passed wasn't limited to the topic at hand. We're not putting that out for ratification. Congress has no obligation.
So then what's the point of having this?
Well, the thing is if there is a Convention of States and we do propose an amendment like a balanced budget amendment that's pertinent to the topic, Congress does have the obligation to send that out for ratification. And by the way, if we were to have something like this, this would be extremely televised. This would be the media hype of the century, because we have not had in the history of our country a convention of states, not to propose an amendment like this. And so this would be something that CNN, Fox News, every single major news media outlet would be shining a spotlight on there. It would be televised. Oh, you can just imagine the media uproar over something like this. So there's going to be an immense amount of pressure if something comes out of this, like a balanced budget amendment. For instance, in our mock convention, we had a mock convention. And Rod can tell you a little bit more about that here in a moment. But one of the things we passed was that the public debt shall not be increased except upon a recorded vote of 2/3 of each House of Congress. That was one of the proposed amendments that we had in our mock convention. Could you imagine how that might transform our nation if we say we're not going to increase the debt unless you have a supermajority, 2/3 of each House of Congress, that increases the vote? And then, by the way, we're going to hold you all accountable because it's going to be a recorded vote.
Now, a question about this mock convention. Who participated? Which states? Was it just Wyoming? Talk about the mock convention.
There was all 50 states were represented. I think there was 144 representatives total at the convention. Democrats, Republicans, every shape of the political spectrum. They just they met for, I think they had a meet and greet on the first day. They worked for 2 days and came up with 6 amendments.
Where was it held and when was it held?
Williamsburg, Virginia, September 21st through 23rd, I believe, last fall.
Okay. And what was the mock convention? Was it focused on just one topic, like it has to be for any other one?
What we do, we limit the subject area to term limits, financial or fiscal responsibility, and the narrowing the scope of the federal government. Those 3 areas only.
Now, Scott was saying that I think they're at 31 states right now for the balanced budget amendment. Is this the closest it's been to have a convention of states?
I believe well, it depends on what the number is, and I'm not sure that's a different convention of states movement. The BBA was started back in the 70s, I believe, maybe even 60s. President Reagan wanted it. There was up to 32 states at that time, and Congress saw the writing on the wall, and they said, "I'll tell you what, we'll take it over. We'll propose a balanced budget amendment." They discussed it. They came to the vote. I think the 67th vote was Senator Bob Dole, who voted against it, so it killed it. Congress came up with the Gramm-Rudman Act after that, which basically fizzled and failed.
All right, now I can see the difficulty of getting to even a convention of states when you need 34 states in order for this to happen. I mean, for example, of course, Wyoming, a very Republican state, but if you look at a lot of states in the northeastern part of the country, very Democratic, and so therefore it's going to be that the party lines issue on that. How difficult is it for a convention of states to really happen when you've got so many red states and so many different blue states for a majority on stuff?
Well, that you just hit the nail on the head, right? We haven't had a convention of states because it is so difficult. And just as Rod was saying just a moment ago, Congress saw the handwriting on the wall during the Reagan administration. They say, "Oh, wait a second, we don't want a convention of states, so Congress will take this over." And what did Congress do? They bombed and failed. They didn't do anything. And so again, we have this is more when you talk about that polarity, the left and the right, Republicans, Democrats. Listen, this is so much more than that. This is about states asserting their sovereignty and their responsibility to push back against a runaway government, a government who is failing time and time again, who is gathering more and more power to themselves. And so really this is a way to usurp Congress, a constitutional way. This is the only way where states can come together and say, you know what, Congress, you've done enough. We're going to assert our sovereignty. We're going to call a convention, and we're going to propose amendments to the United States Constitution to limit your power and to put you back in check. It's a system of checks and balances, just like our framers intended. And by the way, you mentioned the Convention of States. There's many different projects out there. Like I said a little while ago, there's been 400 or 500 applications passed. Why haven't we had it? Well, the BBA is separate from the Conventions of State project that we're really talking about this morning. I don't remember, Rod, what the number is. I want to say we're up somewhere in the teens as far as of this particular application. In other words, we want a resolution, and we tried this in Wyoming. It didn't pass. The feeling, the movement was, well, let's go with the BBA first, because again, once you have this, if it passes. And we have a convention of states, then the topic is limited only to a balanced budget amendment. So the application or the convention that we're talking about, a proposed convention, would be based on the idea of fiscal restraints, term limits, and narrowing the scope of the federal government. And it would be those three areas which we would want to have a proposed convention. So it's a little bit broader than just the BBA. When we talk about fiscal restraints, we're talking more than just a balanced budget amendment. For instance, this amendment here, the public debt shall not be increased except a recorded vote by 2/3 of each House of Congress. And so that's kind of what we're getting at here. We want a convention based on those three things: fiscal restraints, term limits, and narrowing the scope of the federal government.
So let's say we did have a convention in terms of the BBA. Right now, most likely, let's say it did go on, we would not have an increase, most likely, since, for example, the Senate, 52-48 Republican right now? So highly doubtful you would get 2/3 in the Senate, let alone the House of Representatives.
One thing we noticed, not only in simulation but also activity in the states, this is not a Republican-Democrat issue. This is a larger government, a smaller government issue, which leans more conservative. But the blue states are just as involved because the federal government dictates 65% of your state budgets. Now here in Wyoming, with Scott and everybody down in Cheyenne wrangling with that shortfall of revenue, and they only get to pick 35% of what they can actually make decisions on. The federal government mandates that they spend money the way that they do. So it's not necessarily Democrat-Republican. It's who decides, who gets to decide, D.C. or state capitals.
Well, and Rod, thank you for pointing that out. That really is the crux of the issue. Who decides? Who's closest to the people? Well, it's our state legislatures that are closer to the people. Tell you what, people have my cell phone. They get a hold of me all the time, or they get a hold of me on Facebook. They message me, or they chime in. They go to my website. I don't have a staff that they call. You call one of our and I'm not dogging our elected, our federal representatives and senators, But, you call one of them. You go ahead and call Senator Enzi or Senator Barrasso or Congressman Liz Cheney. You call one of them, you know who you're going to get? You're going to get a staffer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you could eventually talk to them if it's important enough, that kind of thing. But again, they're limited in what they can actually do as far as their influence in Congress. The states, and this goes back to the whole idea of federalism. Who decides? And the power was granted to the states. The power that was kept closest to the people was the best way to govern. And we see this as a movement to reverse the trend, to get power away from D.C., and to give it back to the states where it rightly belongs.
Now, Scott, let me ask you this question, since you're a representative at the state level. How much conversation do you have, or do state legislators have with the federal representatives, Enzi, Barrasso, and Cheney?
It depends. I tell you what, our federal delegation is top notch, and they've made it known that they don't like to interfere at all with state policy. They're really focused on federal legislation. They like our input when it comes to federal legislation, but they've made it known that, hey, we're not going to interfere with state policy. You've been elected to do that, and so they're real respectful in that regard. If there's other issues that come up, especially when we're talking about multiple states, it's one of those things. Or when it comes to, for instance, here in Gillette and in Wyoming, our mineral industry,
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about the EPA. Those are things that we'll talk about with our federal delegation.
All right. With that, I want to take a break. We're going to continue in just a bit with Rod as well as Scott Clem here on Wake Up Wyoming.
You're listening to Wake Up Wyoming with Vic Wright on News Radio 1270 and 106.7 FM KIML.
Back here on Wake Up Wyoming, it is 7:45. Vic Wright speaking with Scott Clem. He is a Wyoming House representative for Campbell County. House District 31, Rod, Geil joining us as well, and we're talking about Convention of States. And very briefly, Scott or Rod, explain what Convention of States is, and then I kind of want to get into the Illinois situation we were talking about off the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, the Convention of States allows in the Constitution, in Article 5, for the states to get together, sit down, talk about the problems and the issues of the country, narrowing to those or limited to those three subjects: term limits, fiscal responsibility, and narrowing the scope. So any problems that are issues that are coming up in those subject areas can be discussed, try and find solutions. Scott can tell you about when he was at the simulation. They go through the motions, they go through all the processes of writing the law, fine-tuning it, tweaking it, and then when they get to it, they approve it. Once it's approved, it goes back to the states for ratification.
All right, so we were talking about how you need, I think it's 34 states in order to, that's the majority, in order to have the Convention of States convention in the first place. And we were talking about this off the air, and we talked about briefly on the air as well, is you've got red states, you've got blue states. But I believe Scott brought up the whole issue that's going on in Illinois right now. And, of course, I've talked about this on the air before as well. Illinois, of course, their budget is just a disaster. I mean, they had a special session. It didn't really help out much and everything else. And you're talking about how even Democrats are going to be disgruntled about certain things. And go into that a little bit, Scott.
Well, this is what happens when you don't create a budget, a balanced budget, and live by it. This is what happens when you have a massive amount of debt and you have no way to repay it. And so that's what's going on in Illinois. Illinois' credit rating is junk now. Their financial policies are a mess, and it's because they've doled out public funds more than they take in, and so they have a massive amount of debt. Well, let's equate that to the federal government here. $20 trillion in debt. Now we kind of, just kind of pass that off. Oh, that's nothing. Listen, our interest rates haven't gone up yet. Once those interest rates go up, our country is going to be hurting. I'm convinced, and I'm not fear-mongering here, okay? I see this as being the end of America if we are called on our debt. And it's that serious to me. That's part of the reason why I support a balanced budget amendment, but I realize that's not enough. You have to put some reforms on our federal government. And so, again, when we talk about a left or a right, this isn't so much a left or a right issue. It's about who decides when it comes to fiscal policy. Does the federal government decide that for the states, or do the states decide that for themselves? We talked off air a little bit about, maybe it was on air, about the fact that the federal government likes to give out federal funds. But what do? It's federal strings attached.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, they can't afford to give out federal funds because we're that much in debt. And even now, I was hopeful with Trump. I still am hopeful, but our federal government has had record spending right now. I'm not too impressed about that. Our Congress can't seem to get it together, and they're talking about tax cuts, which, hey, I'm all for tax cuts. But let's talk about some spending reforms.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about decreasing spending so we can get our debt under control and we can make our way to a balanced budget and eat away at our deficit and live within our means. Because if we don't control our debt, it's going to be the end of our country. So with you talk about liberal Illinois, they're starting to get it. Sometimes experience is the best way to learn, and they're learning it right now that they can't overspend. And so this is something that's palatable to them. We talk about these resolutions. These are the applications, if you will, to call a convention on a particular topic in which you need 2/3 votes of the states, or 34 states. And those resolutions are on the books. So long as the state passes it, it's on the books in perpetuity until it gets rescinded. For instance, after the Reagan administration and all that debacle about not, in Congress saying, hey, we'll do a balanced budget amendment, which they didn't, someone in Wyoming went ahead and passed a bill to remove that application, to remove that resolution. It was removed. That's the reason why we had to pass it again this last year.
Why did it take so long to pass it again? Was it just not brought up until?
No. People bring it up year after year. But it really comes down to people have a really strong fear of a runaway convention. They think that if we call a convention of the states, that it's not going to be limited to the topic at hand, and that there's going to be amendments all over the place. They're going to get rid of the Second Amendment.
Pork barreling.
Yeah,
basically.
It's going to be a disaster. That's part of the reason why we had the mock convention last year. We had delegates, they call them commissioners, okay? But they're delegates from all 50 states that were there. Big group of people. It was 1 vote per state. And basically, the people who called us there, the Convention of States Progress project, they called us there, and then once we got all together, they were hands off. They stepped back and they wanted to see it was an experiment. Is this thing going to crash and burn, or is it going to succeed? And it was amazing because it succeeded. It succeeded beyond my expectations, and it was run according to rules. If there was something out of line, that's just it. Someone says, point of order, and the conversation is stopped. If someone would have said, I want to propose an amendment to strike the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Point of order. That's out of line. That is not why we're here. It's not limited to the scope of the convention that was called.
And then also, I think you brought it up, if I understood you correctly, Congress could also say, it's going to be, we're not going to go through this because you went off topic, basically, correct?
Bingo. There's so many checks and balances. And we were talking off air. If we did have a convention, one of the things that I found is you're going to have states, you're going to have California there with their delegates. By the way, they might send 200 delegates. That would be pretty foolish on their part.
But they only count for 1 vote, though.
1 vote per state. That's
right.
just it. So you can have a big team of delegates, but you only get 1 vote. And so the idea then is, and that's good because that puts us on equal footing. Wyoming, the least populated state, puts us on equal footing with other larger states. And so, but you're going to have some of these differing philosophies. And so, will it be hard? It's hard enough to have a convention. We've seen that because we've never had one. Will it be hard to pass an amendment out? You need a simple majority. But will it be hard? Absolutely. And rightly so. This is our Constitution that we're talking about. This isn't some flippant document. This is something that we base our lives and livelihood off of here in the United States. So it should be something that we don't want to lightly tinker around with. This is a serious thing, but serious times call for serious measures. And our founders, they saw the wisdom in putting this in the Constitution. They knew that the Constitution wasn't perfect. They knew that there would be some things that would happen, and they said, hey, listen, states, this is a way for you to put our country back in line, to take back power from a runaway federal government, and here's the process. Use it. But again, part of the reason why we don't have some of this stuff going on today, or people that are leery of it, is because of that very simple thing that, hey, we're worried about a runaway federal government. People agree on the problem that we have a runaway Congress, a runaway federal government, but we come to differing solutions on the solution. Some people say, my friends, people that are really conservative, they say, well, listen, what we need to do is we need just to elect representatives or senators who will abide by the Constitution. Well, my question is how many election cycles is that going to take?
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, our debt is going to increase even more, and we're going to be that much closer to a dangerous fiscal cliff that will change our country forever.
All right, with that, we're going to take our last break. We'll wrap it up in just a bit here with Scott Clem as well as Ron Geil here on Wake Up Wyoming. Back here on Wake Up Wyoming, couple minutes left here with Scott Clem as well as Ron Geil joining us. We're talking about the Convention of States, the Convention of States project. Now, gentlemen, I want to talk about this. You brought in a book, Rod, for me to take a look at and read. Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, Using Article 5 to Restore Freedom and Stop Runaway Government. This is written by Tom A. Coburn. Tell us about who Mr. Coburn is, first off, Rod.
Yeah, he's a physician. As he says, he delivered over 4,000 babies in Oklahoma. Had a private practice, businessman before that. We lived in a Democrat district. Decided to run for U.S. Congress. Won, overwhelmingly won. I think he did 5 terms, if I'm not mistaken. Then he sat out. He kind of term limited himself. It must have been just 3 terms. He term limited himself. Went back to private practice. There was a call for him to try and run for U.S. Senate. He took that. He won his election, he won his re-election, and after 2 or 3 years, decided that D.C.'s not going to fix this problem. He's a doctor. He likes to solve not just the symptoms, but the problems. And now he's written a book. It's very thorough, tells the history and the action that we can take.
All right, you said he was in a Democratic district. Was he Republican or Democrat?
He's a Republican, yes.
Okay, so that's definitely very interesting, especially in the way we were talking about the split down the party lines and how that could be a little difficult with things. More information at conventionofstates.com if you want to take a look at that. By the way, the book, once again, is called Smashing the D.C. Monopoly, to take a look at that. So very quickly, we've got about a minute and a half. What's next for the Convention of States project?
Well, we're actually the only group that has an action plan. We've got over 2.2 million volunteers nationwide. We've got over 2,000 people that have, right here in Wyoming that has taken interest in this and trying to help out. We got to get the Congress or the state legislature motivated to bring it up. We don't know if we'll do it in the budget session, as that's kind of a tight window. We're just trying to get the grassroots going. If people want to try and get involved with this and get D.C. to actually drain the swamp, this is the way to do it.
All right. Conventionofstates.com is the website for more information on that. By the way, if you want to call Rod, he's local here, 307-343-4693, 343-4693. Scott, want to thank you for taking some time to come in, talk with us about this. Definitely an interesting topic, definitely an interesting conversation. Rod, thanks for coming in as well. And by the way, if local members here of Campbell County want to get a hold of you, Scott, how do they do so?
Absolutely. You can get a hold of me on Facebook. Just find me there. You can Google my name. You'll get my website. Or call me directly, 307-660-7141. That's my personal cell. You can text me. You can call me. Whatever is your preference.
All right. And you serve, as I basically said, I guess, the meat of Campbell County, Gillette, Crestview, Antelope Valley, that area of the county. So even if you don't represent them, I'm sure you can lead them in the right direction for the correct
absolutely.
person. All right. Thanks, gentlemen, for coming in. We're going to take a break with Fox News.